Iridescent-throned Aphrodite, deathless child of Zeus, wile-weaver, I now implore you, don't, I beg you, lady with pains and torments, crush down my spirit. The Greek poetess Sappho was a passionate soul, and nobody worshipped women as much as she, and that's why her life and work have been discussed for centuries, with particular attention paid to her sexuality. Kalimera, fellow poets. My name's Guy, and welcome to Its History. Today's meeting is on the Mediterranean island of Lesbos. I'll get straight to the point. When we're talking about Sappho, we know very little for certain. There is some information about her life and work, but the problem is that all of this was only recorded in later legends. Sappho holds the title of the most important female lyricist of the classical age. She probably came from an old aristocratic family and lived sometime between 630 and 570 BC on the island of Lesbos in the South Aegean. In her youth, she learned to play the lyre, similar in appearance to a small harp and a common instrument in antiquity. She also composed songs. We presume that she was married and that her husband died at some point. She might have had a daughter. You'll notice that these are far from hard facts. Lesbos was in those days a cultural centre, and life there was very liberal. Women were highly prized and esteemed. Sappho could probably live as she wanted. She moved in a circle of girls and young women. Modern commentators suggest she was a teacher, but there is no proof for this. The women could have been friends, pupils, or members of a cult honouring Aphrodite, the goddess of love. Even in ancient times, the wildest rumours circulated about Sappho's life, work, and sexual orientation. She was, by all accounts, petite and dark, with an insatiable appetite for sex. The philosopher and poet Plato, on the other hand, described her rather more ambiguously, as beautiful. Sappho was something of a poster girl. Even during her lifetime, she commanded a lot of attention. So was Sappho as horrible as the night, or as beautiful as Aphrodite? We'll never know, but everyone agreed back then on one thing for sure. She was one lyrical lady. People built statues in her honour, and Plato called her the 10th muse. Aristoteles reported that Sappho was revered, quote, although she was a woman. And centuries later, in 1798, the German writer Friedrich Schlegel mused, if we had the complete works of Sappho, it is quite possible that we would never recall Homer. Sappho's poetry was exceptional. Her work included religious hymns, wedding songs, and love songs. These were collected in 9 books and were regarded as part of the great canon of antiquity. Sappho's poetry has the status of high art and served as an inspiration to other poets. Most celebrated was Sappho's expressive power and clear language. The poetess even developed a completely new lyrical metre, the Sapphic stanza, which was adopted by other poets. It's hard to believe that only 200 fragments of Sappho's poetry remain, an estimated 700th of her complete works. A pathetic 4 poems have been reconstructed to this day. To achieve this, researchers evaluated references and quotes from other authors and analysed fragments of papyri. The last poem was discovered in 2014 and caused a mild sensation. It was named Poem for a Brother, as it addresses Sappho's brother. Much more exciting than any brother, however, are the women to whom Sappho sings in her poems, and whose beauty she celebrates. Her words ooze intimacy and passion. It might seem that a woman who writes to another woman, I burn and desire, I burn away for you, is a clear-cut lesbian, but it's not that simple. The only contemporary source on Sappho's life is her poems. Most modern academics advise against reading her writings autobiographically. It might well be that Sappho's poems were intended to be read out loud to an audience that could have been entirely male. Perhaps she wrote about a range of topics, but only the fragments regarding the women remain. Sappho's sexual orientation is anything but clear. There is even the legend that as a result of unrequited love with a ferryman, she jumped from a cliff. It's probable, though, that this story was an invention to present Sappho as heterosexual. Truth be told, she was older when she died. We know that because in one of her poems, she complains of greying hair and creaky knees. Whether she was homosexual or not, the term lesbian dates back to Sappho's erotic poetry. The expression, doing it like the ladies of Lesbos, actually had nothing to do with homosexuality back in ancient times. No, the Greeks used the expression solely to refer to blowjobs, which was something the inhabitants of Lesbos quite clearly could get their heads around. The first clear link between female homosexuality and the island of Lesbos comes from around the 2nd century AD. In the 17th century France, the labels lesbian and sapphist turned up for the first time, and in 1787 a German lexicographer mentioned lesbian love. By the mid-19th century, dictionaries included the term too. Whether Sappho was a lesbian is neither here nor there. We know that in later Greek history, her poetry was frowned upon. Expressing sensations with the passion and commitment of Sappho was seen as immoral. But it wasn't just the later Greeks who had problems with Sappho's poetry. The early church banned it too. One theologian wrote that Sappho was a sex-hungry whore, singing about her own sluttishness. In the Victorian age, it was all the rage to portray Sappho as the leader of a sort of seminary. These were all attempts to find an innocent explanation for Sappho's preference for young women. Lesbos is a particular hotspot for lesbian women today, and for all those who want to be open about their sexuality. The inhabitants of Lesbos are not entirely happy about this. In 2008, some of them even instituted proceedings against Greece's homosexual community. They wanted to prevent them from using the term lesbian in their name, saying that the inhabitants of the island were the only permissible lesbians, and that the sense of the word had nothing to do with sexual orientation. The proceedings were thrown out, and we will probably never again think of this Greek island in the Aegean when we hear the word lesbian spoken in public. But if you want to learn more about Greece's sexual backstory, click up here to see our video on sex in antiquity. And if you're interested in what Sappho's poetry is all about, be sure to check out our Facebook page, where we've posted one of her poems. What do you think? Is Sappho's lesbian legacy as important as some people say? And should the inhabitants of Lesbos have the right to free their home from homosexuality? Leave your comments and questions in the section below, and don't forget to subscribe to It's History for more where this came from. My name's Guy, thanks for popping by, and see you next time.